I always felt that despite all the mistakes I made throughout my life, I still held a safe place in my son's heart. I wasn't the best father in the world, but I never stopped being present within my possibilities. I always worked hard, always tried to give him everything I could, even if, at times, work consumed more of me than I'd like to admit. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for that moment, that instant frozen in time, which still pierces my chest like a cold blade. It was an ordinary afternoon, almost banal, the kind of day you'd live without retaining any memory, until something happens and changes everything. I was in the kitchen, stirring the already lukewarm coffee in my cup, when I heard hesitant footsteps in the hallway. My son rarely spoke to me so directly. In recent months, our conversations had become a mixture of uncomfortable silences and short sentences, as if each word carried too much weight. But that day he entered the kitchen with hunched shoulders, holding something in his hands, as if he were about to confess to a crime. I tried to smile. I tried to break the ice. "Did something happen, son?" He took a deep breath, one of those long, tense sighs, the kind of breath someone takes when they are about to hurt another person, even unintentionally. And then he said, in a low, almost broken voice, "Dad, please, don't come to my graduation." The moment I heard those words, I felt time stop. The clock on the wall continued ticking away. The seconds. But it was as if the sound had vanished. I could only stare at it, trying to decipher what was behind that request. My heart beat faster, as if trying to warn me that something very wrong had just happened. My first thought was, I heard wrong. My second thought was, why? And the third one, the one that hurt the most. What did I do this time? I opened my mouth, but no words came out. It was as if my voice had been ripped away along with that sentence. Silence settled between us. A silence so heavy it seemed to fill every corner of the house. He avoided my gaze, and that hurt even more. Because my boy, the one who ran into my arms when he was little, who proudly showed me his school drawings, who slept on the sofa waiting for me to get home late from work, now seemed afraid to look at me, or maybe ashamed, or maybe he had been trained to believe something about me that I myself didn't know. I tried to ask. I tried to speak. "Why, son? What happened? I don't want to embarrass you." My voice came out trembling. I felt ashamed of it. I felt ashamed of how fragile, insecure, and begging for a piece of space in his life I seemed. But that's what I was at that moment. A wounded, confused father, trying to understand where I had lost my son without even realizing it. He simply replied, "It's better this way, Dad. Please, just don't go." And then he left. He left me standing in the kitchen, with the cup of coffee in my hands, still hot enough to burn, but I felt nothing. The emotional pain was greater than any physical sensation. I sat down. I ran my hands over my face, trying to breathe. But the more I tried, the more anguish grew inside me. I never thought I'd hear that from my own son. That phrase kept echoing in my mind, repeating, like a broken bell, as if it were a warning that something much bigger was about to happen, something I didn't yet understand. For a moment, I thought about not insisting. I thought about respecting his request, even if it destroyed me. But, at the same time, something inside me told me that this wasn't normal, that it wasn't just a teenager ashamed of his father. There was something behind it, something hidden, an explanation he didn't give, a truth that someone didn't want me to know. And it was at that moment, still sitting in that silent kitchen, that I realized the story was only beginning, and that request, "Dad, don't go," wasn't an ordinary request. It was a sign, a warning, a door that was about to open to a world of painful revelations, hidden lies, and a truth that, sooner or later, would come to light, whether I wanted it to or not. After my son left the kitchen, leaving behind only the echo of the request that shattered me, the house plunged into a silence that seemed to have a life of its own. It wasn't a calming silence, the kind that brings peace. It was a heavy, suffocating silence that lingered in the hallways like a shadow. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely alone in my own home. I stood up slowly, still trying to process what had happened. The coffee in the cup no longer mattered. Nothing mattered except that absurd phrase that kept throbbing in my head. Dad, please, don't come to my graduation. Each time I mentally repeated those words, it was as if a new doubt arose, and each doubt came accompanied by an even greater fear. Our minds are treacherous at times like these. They take a wound and start poking at it, amplifying it, imagining scenarios that may not even exist, but that hurt as if they were real. Was he ashamed of me? That question hit me like a punch, because no matter how hard I tried to be strong, I knew our relationship had scars. Loss of patience, absences, words spoken in the heat of difficult moments. Had all of that accumulated to the point where he didn't want me seen by his side anymore? Or was he angry? Anger at not being the perfect father, though no father is. Anger at not being involved in everything, at missing some performances, some championships, some birthdays. Even though I always tried to make up for it, maybe he wouldn't have forgiven me. But then another possibility began to grow within me, like a dark seed. What if he was hiding something? Something more serious. Something someone told him. Something that perhaps wasn't even true. That thought made me pace around the house. I opened and closed drawers, rearranged things that didn't need rearranging, walked in circles. Down the hallway, I looked like a man trying to escape himself, because deep down, my greatest pain wasn't his request itself. It was the fact that I didn't know why. The lack of explanation was what was destroying me. I ran my hand over my face, trying to push away the bad feelings, but they wouldn't go away. It was as if they were stuck to me. I remembered when he was little, when he called me a hero, when anything I said had value. Now, suddenly, I was the man he wanted to stay away from. The father who should be absent from the most important moment of his life. The feeling of rejection hit hard, and it wasn't just rejection. It was displacement. It was a feeling that I was outside of my own family, as if there were a circle I no longer belonged to. I tried to justify it rationally. He must be nervous about graduation. Teenagers are complicated. Maybe it's just a phase. But even as I thought this, my heart was telling me something else. It was telling me that something was wrong, something deep, something that was being hidden from me. That silence stayed with me for the rest of the day. I tried to turn on the television, but I couldn't pay attention. I tried to use my cell phone, but I couldn't read anything. The only thing I could really feel was a huge emptiness, a hole in my chest that grew bigger every minute. Late in the afternoon, as he walked down the hall to go to his room, I called to him, "Son, are you sure about what you asked for?" He didn't stop. He didn't look at me. He only answered with his back turned. "I have," and he closed the door. That sound, the door closing, was like a period at the end of a chapter I didn't want to end. The distance between us seemed to grow larger with each passing hour. I wondered, when did I lose the right to be by my own son's side? That night, sitting alone in the living room, I started imagining even worse things. Had someone told him something about me? Had they made up a lie? Had he believed it? Had his mother said something? I didn't know, and that uncertainty was torture. Each minute of silence increased the weight of doubt, and each doubt fueled the fear. I'm afraid of losing my son forever. I was afraid he was hurt by me in a way that I couldn't fix. Fear of discovering a truth that I might not have been prepared to face. When I finally fell asleep, tossing and turning, I knew one thing. That request was not normal. That silence was unusual. That sudden distance wasn't natural. Something was happening. Something serious. Sooner or later, I would know what, even if the truth hurt. Even if it meant facing something that deep down I had feared from the very first moment he avoided looking me in the eye. When I think about my history with my son, I can't help but feel that bitter mix of pride and regret, because deep down, everything I did, every decision, every sacrifice, every night lost working, always had a single goal: to ensure that he lacked nothing. But life has a cruel way of showing us that while trying to build a future, we can end up losing important parts of the present. From the moment he was born, I knew I needed to be strong. I didn't have an easy life. I didn't have present parents. I didn't have perfect role models. And perhaps that's why I put so much pressure on myself to be better than what I received. I wanted my son to have what I never had: security, stability, opportunities. But to achieve that, I had to pay a high price. And that price was time. Time I would never get back. I remember him as a little boy, running around the room with those quick, clumsy steps. I remember the way he waited for me at the window when I came home late from work. I remember how he would run to me with a huge smile, as if nothing else in the world mattered besides my hug. Those moments were my fuel, my motivation, my daily proof that the effort was worth it. But as he grew older, things changed. Smiles became rarer, conversations became shorter, and I grew, more tired, more distant, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to work. I always needed to work. Over time, double shifts, weekends I traded for money to pay overdue bills. While I carried the weight of the world, my son carried the weight of my absence. I thought he understood. I thought, deep down, he knew I did everything for him. But now, looking back, I see that maybe I expected too much from a boy. Maybe I placed the responsibility of interpreting my intentions on his shoulders, when I should have simply been there. Our relationship began to deteriorate almost imperceptibly. There wasn't a specific fight, nor a defining moment when everything fell apart. It happened gradually. A dinner I missed, a school presentation I missed, a birthday party I arrived too late to. Each absence was a small crack, and cracks, when left untreated, become fissures. Then they become holes. Then they become distances. Over time, he stopped telling me things. He stopped asking me for help. He stopped calling me when he had doubts or fears. It wasn't that he was angry. It was that he had learned to live without me. And that is perhaps the most painful reality for a father, realizing that his own son no longer misses his presence. Even so, I didn't stop trying. Whenever I could, I made myself present. I showed up at games, tried to talk, tried to demonstrate that I cared. But sometimes, when you take too long to enter someone's world, the doors are already closed, and you can only see, through small cracks, what could once have been shared. I also know that the separation from his mother complicated everything even more. It wasn't an amicable breakup. There were hurt feelings, harsh words, accusations, and in the midst of all that, he was torn. Children don't choose sides, but they suffer when they're pushed to choose. And as much as I tried to protect him from that, I know that some things got out of my control. The distance between us grew, not a physical distance, because I've always lived nearby, but an emotional distance, which is much worse. He started looking at me with that expression that mixed old admiration with a kind of silent disappointment. It wasn't explicit anger. It was something sadder. Something like, "I wanted you here, but you're always there." And even so, I continued to believe that there was still time, that I could recover what was lost, that one day when he was older he would understand everything. He would understand the reason for my absences, the weight of my responsibilities, the invisible effort a father makes in the hope of giving his son a better future. But when he asked me not to go to graduation, I realized that maybe I had been wrong all this time. Maybe I took too long to repair the cracks. Maybe I let the distance grow to the point of becoming an abyss. And that's why that request hurt so much. Because, at that moment, my mind went back to all those years when I tried to be too strong, too hard-working, too responsible, and ended up being too absent. All my flaws came to the surface at once, as if the entire past was being revisited to show me where I went wrong. But even with all that, there was something inside me that told me that this pain wasn't just about the past, that something was happening in the present, something that had nothing to do with just my past mistakes, something he was hiding, something someone was influencing. And it is precisely this mixture of guilt, doubt, and fear that made me realize that graduation would not just be a ceremony, it would be a turning point, a moment where, whether I wanted it or not, the truth would finally come to light. When night finally fell that day, after hours immersed in doubt, painful memories, and a silence that seemed endless, I made a decision I had been avoiding for a long time, to call my son's mother. It wasn't something I did often, Our communication, after the separation, had always been the bare minimum and always tense, always with that air of two people who still carried poorly healed wounds. I picked up my phone with a mixture of hesitation and desperation. I needed answers. I needed to understand what was behind that absurd request. My hand trembled slightly as I searched for her contact. When I touched her name on the screen, I felt my heart race as if I were about to face an enemy I didn't know how to fight. After a few rings, she answered. Her voice sounded dry, distant, as if I had interrupted something important, or as if I were someone she preferred not to speak to. "What is it?" she said, without any greeting. I took a deep breath. "I need to talk to you about our son." On the other end, for a few seconds, there was only silence. Not the same sad silence I felt at home, but a silence full of walls, of limits, of distance. Then she answered with that icy voice I knew so well. "What's wrong with him?" I swallowed hard. "He asked me not to go to the graduation." Another silence. Longer, heavier. I continued. "Do you know anything about this?" She sighed, but not a sigh of concern. It was an impatient sigh, as if the subject were too uncomfortable to discuss with me. "He made his decision," she said without hesitation. "Respect it." These words fell on me like stones. Respect? As if I were an intruder? As if I weren't the father? I tried to stay calm, but I want to understand. Is it something about me? Is he upset about something? Her coldness grew with each sentence. "He's practically an adult. If he doesn't want you to go, it's because he has his reasons. Isn't that clear to you?" The harsh way she spoke, as if she were defending herself against an accusation I hadn't even made everything even stranger. It was as if she were hiding something, as if she were trying to end the matter too quickly. My heart started beating faster. That unsettling feeling returned, the idea that there was something much bigger behind it all. "Did you say anything to him?" I asked, trying not to sound accusatory. "Something about me? About our past?" Her response came just as quickly, as if it had already been prepared. "Don't make things up." He made his decision. Period. I felt the injustice burning inside me. Why was she being so evasive, so cold, so indifferent to the fact that it was destroying me? I tried to speak again, but she interrupted me. "Look, I don't want to discuss this. He doesn't want you there. Don't make it worse. Just respect him." And before I could insist, she ended the call. I stared at the phone in my hand as if the device could offer some kind of explanation. The call had been short, but it had said everything that didn't need to be said, and hinted at everything I'd feared for years. The feeling that she always wanted to push me away, that slowly, silently, she had been building a narrative around me. A narrative I didn't know exactly what it was, but which, in my son's eyes, seemed to be gaining strength. My chest tightened. It was as if I were fighting something invisible, something I couldn't see, but that was clearly there, a force pushing my son away from me, and her coldness only increased my suspicion. Why did she seem so comfortable with my absence at the graduation? Why didn't he show surprise, or concern, or even empathy? Why did it sound like he was already expecting me to call? And the worst part, why didn't anyone want me to show up? That question wouldn't leave my head. It was as if it were written on the wall, flashing, screaming, "Something is wrong. Something you don't know. Something they are hiding from you." The more I thought about the way she spoke, as if I were the problem, as if my presence were a threat, the more the mystery grew. I didn't know if it had to do with some old resentment of hers, if it was simply past hurt, or if someone had actually said something to my son that made him believe I didn't deserve to be there. But one thing became clear. My ex-wife knew more than she was willing to say, and this intensified something within me that I hadn't felt in a long time, the feeling that they were taking something precious from me on purpose. The call ended, leaving a bitter taste, but also a new kind of motivation. I needed to find out the truth. I needed to dig deeper, because after that conversation, doubt turned into certainty. My son's request hadn't been spontaneous. It hadn't just been an emotional outburst. He had been provoked, induced. What if he really believed something that wasn't true? What if someone, maybe her, maybe someone else, was shaping his view of me? That possibility was painful, but it also gave me clarity. The situation was becoming more serious than I had imagined, and from that moment on, I knew. I couldn't simply accept it. I needed to find out why everyone was so determined to keep me away. In the 2 days that followed that cold conversation with my son's mother, I lived as if I were walking on broken glass. Every step hurt. Every thought cut me. The closer graduation day got, the heavier the weight of that phrase he uttered became, and the coldness with which his mother confirmed that he made his decision. The problem is that decisions like these don't just appear out of thin air. Something was wrong, and I felt it in every fiber of my being. I spent those days trying to stick to my routine, but it was impossible. At work, I would read the same document 3 or 4 times without absorbing anything. Any conversation with me had to be repeated. My colleagues noticed my discouragement, but I didn't give details. How do you explain that your own son doesn't want you at his graduation? It's the kind of pain a parent keeps to themselves because they're ashamed even to admit it. At night, I wandered aimlessly around the house. My mind worked tirelessly. I relived all the memories, all the absences, all the mistakes, as if trying to find a logical explanation for something that had no logic at all. The feeling of injustice grew. I felt that his decision wasn't purely his own. It was as if another hand was guiding it. Then, 2 days before graduation, something happened that would completely change the course of history. It was late afternoon. I was sitting on the sofa, no television, no music, just me and that heavy silence that had become my companion. Suddenly, my cell phone rang. The sound seemed too loud for that tense atmosphere. I looked at the screen. Unknown number. For a moment, I thought about ignoring it. Lately, everything unexpected seemed to come to hurt. But something told me to answer. "Hello?" I said, without much expectation. On the other end, a female voice, formal, professional. "Good afternoon. Are you Mr. Ayu?" I confirmed. "This is Carla from the office at the school your son attends." My heart raced immediately. The school? Why would the school be calling me? And right now? Yes, of course. Did something happen? The secretary took a deep breath, as if she were measuring her words. "The principal would like you to come to the school tomorrow morning. He says he needs to speak with you personally before the graduation ceremony." The atmosphere grew more tense. My chest felt heavy. At that moment, all the answers I wanted, and all the ones I feared, seemed to be hidden behind that sentence. "With me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "About what?" She hesitated, a brief but noticeable hesitation. "He didn't specify, sir. He just asked me to emphasize that it's important. He said you'll understand when you get here." That sounded even stranger. The school had never called me for anything like this before. My son had no disciplinary problems. He never got into trouble. He was a quiet, introverted boy, studious, the kind of student who goes unnoticed because he never causes trouble. So why now, just before graduation, did the principal want to speak to me? In person. I felt my stomach churn. But does this have anything to do with the ceremony or with my son? The secretary avoided answering directly. "The director prefers to explain in person. He only asked that you not be absent. He said it's essential that you be here." "Fundamental?" The word echoed like a warning. "Okay," I replied. "I'll go." She thanked them and hung up. I stood there, holding my cell phone as if it were about to explode at any moment. The call was quick to the point, but it left a trail of unanswered questions. What did the school have to do with my absence from graduation? Why didn't the principal speak on the phone? And why did the secretary seem uncomfortable? Suddenly, my world, which was already confusing, became even more hazy. I walked around the house trying to find some logic to the situation. Did my son say something at school? Did he tell a story about me? Did his mother file a complaint? Was the principal calling me in to give me some kind of warning? Or worse, were they trying to legally prevent me from attending my graduation? The mind created terrifying scenarios, most of them improbable but all frightening. Deep down, my biggest fear was discovering that my son was believing something terrible about me. I always thought the school remained neutral in family matters, but now they were calling me, looking for me, asking me to come. Why? I sat back down on the sofa. I ran my hands over my face. I tried to calm my breathing, but it was impossible. The feeling that was growing inside me wasn't just fear, it was a premonition. Premonition. Something told me that conversation with the school would be the key to understanding everything hidden behind my son's request, as if that meeting would open the door to a truth that had been kept from me at all costs. And then, for the first time since it all began, a question formed forcefully in my mind. What does the school have to do with it? I didn't know the answer, but I did know one thing. The next day, I would find out, whether I wanted to or not. The next day, I woke up. Before my alarm went off, I hadn't slept well. I spent the night tossing and turning, trying to figure out what the principal wanted from me, why the school was calling me right now, and, most importantly, trying to control the anxiety that seemed to grow stronger every minute. The morning was cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your chest and makes everything heavier. I drank a quick coffee, but the taste seemed distant, metallic, as if my mind were somewhere else. And it was. I could only think of one thing. What would be waiting for me at school? I left home a little earlier than necessary. I walked to the car with the feeling that each step brought me closer to a truth I might not be ready to hear. The route to the school I had studied so many times for meetings, presentations, and end-of-year celebrations seemed different. The street seemed narrower, the buildings taller, the world quieter. Even the traffic, normally chaotic at that time, seemed to be in slow motion. When I parked in front of the school, I felt my heart race. The blue gate, which I knew so well, now seemed like a portal to something unknown. I sighed deeply before crossing the gate, like someone about to enter dangerous territory, even without knowing why. As soon as I stepped onto the courtyard, I felt a strange atmosphere in the air. There were students walking back and forth, teachers chatting, staff organizing things for the graduation ceremony that would take place the next day. Everything seemed normal, but something was out of place. It was one of those moments when you don't know exactly what's wrong, but you feel instinctively that something is. I walked slowly down the main hallway, and that's when I noticed the first signs. A professor I had greeted before walked past me. He raised his hand quickly as if trying to be polite, but his gaze didn't match his smile. It was a heavy, uncomfortable look, almost as if he felt pity. I returned the gesture with a shy nod, trying to understand what was happening. Seconds later, a teacher who used to be very nice to me appeared in the opposite hallway. When she saw me, she immediately looked away, pretending to look for something in her bag. The look was so abrupt that it was clear. She didn't want to cross paths with me. She didn't even want to look at me. I kept walking, and the further I got, the more I noticed the same pattern. Murmurs, quick glances, tense expressions. Some employees would whisper something and stop, abruptly when I passed by. I didn't hear any specific words, just that kind of muffled whisper, cut off in the middle that makes it clear you're the subject. That unsettling feeling began to grow inside me. I'm not a paranoid person. I never have been. But even the most balanced of men can tell when he himself becomes the center of strange attention. And at that moment, every glance was a silent confirmation that something was being said about me. Something that, it seemed, everyone knew, except me. The walk down the hallway began to feel longer than it actually was. It was like walking through a tunnel full of closed doors. There was a weight in the air, a kind of unspoken judgment. And worst of all, even without anyone explicitly saying anything, I started to feel guilty about something I didn't even know what it was. I walked past the teacher's room. The door was ajar. I heard two of them talking. "Did you see? He's here." Oh my God. Does he know? At that very moment, the conversation stopped. The door closed slowly. I felt my stomach clench. My steps slowed. My hands began to sweat. The entire school seemed to have transformed into a giant stage of sideways glances, hidden whispers, and silent judgments. I tried to maintain composure, tried to act naturally, but inside, it was as if I was approaching something inevitable, something that would be revealed, and that, in one way or another, would change everything. As I turned down the corridor leading to the Administration building, I passed two cleaning staff members chatting by the water fountain. They looked at me at the same time, not with disapproval, but with that kind of silent compassion that hurts more than contempt. One of them even lowered her head, as if she were ashamed for me, and that hit me hard, because it wasn't just awkwardness in the air. It was knowledge, information. Something was wandering the hallways like a ghost, and I was the only one who couldn't see it. The feeling of injustice returned with force. I wondered, what did my son say? What did they tell the school about me? What did my ex-wife say? It was like walking through a nightmare where everyone knows the plot, except the protagonist. I approached the administration door and paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. My chest tightened, as if I were about to enter a room where I would be accused of something. I didn't know if an explanation, a confrontation, or just more silence awaited me inside. But one thing I knew, that wasn't normal. The way people looked at me, the interrupted conversations, the eyes averted, the loaded expressions, everything pointed to a single certainty that began to echo within me like a silent siren. It seemed like everyone knew something, except me, and that feeling of being excluded from a fundamental truth about my own son was what hurt the most, and that was what pushed me even further towards the principal's door. As soon as I reached the administration door, I knocked lightly, trying to disguise the nervousness that was consuming me inside. An employee opened the door and simply gestured for me to enter. There was something strange even in that. Normally, the service was welcoming, with a smile, good morning, some kind of cordiality. But there, at that moment, everything seemed permeated by tension. The administration hallway smelled of paper, stale coffee, and anxiety. As I walked, I noticed the secretary who had called me the day before. She was sitting behind the counter, but when she saw me enter, she straightened her posture as if she'd been caught doing something wrong. Her eyes avoided mine, and she simply pointed to the door at the end of the hallway. "The director is waiting for you," he murmured. I thanked them, trying not to show my growing discomfort, and continued towards the indicated door. The simple act of walking seemed to last an eternity. Each step echoed inside my head with a weight that made no sense. But that I felt in every muscle of my body. Before knocking, I took a deep breath. My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. There was a strange feeling, that impression that, upon crossing that door, nothing would ever be the same again. And when I finally touched the wood, I heard the director's voice on the other side. "Please come in." I opened the door slowly. The director was sitting behind the desk, but it wasn't his usual posture. I knew him from other meetings. He was a confident, articulate man, firm in what he said. But that morning, he seemed different, worn out, worried, with the heavy look of someone carrying an uncomfortable truth. He stood up when I entered, as if trying to show respect, or perhaps care. "Thank you for coming so quickly," he said. "Please, have a seat." I sat down, but I couldn't relax. My hands were clasped in my lap, and I felt my fingers trembling slightly. The director walked slowly around the table, as if choosing each step carefully, and closed the door behind him. Then he gestured for me to follow him. "Actually," he said, opening the side door that led to the inner corridor of the school theater, "I'd like us to talk somewhere else." That caught me by surprise. "Another place?" I asked, confused. "Yes, it's better away from prying ears," she replied, her voice low, almost a whisper. "This way." That sentence hit me like a warning. Something was really wrong, and the fact that he wanted to keep me away from the administrative building where professors, coordinators, and staff were circulating indicated that what he had to say wasn't just delicate, it was explosive. I followed the principal down the narrow corridor to the side entrance of the auditorium. The heavy curtains were still drawn, and the stage was dimly lit by light filtering through the gaps. That space, normally bustling with life at school events, was silent, almost solemn. There were chairs stacked up, boxes of sound equipment, and a table with papers. On the stage, the director led me to a narrow door behind the curtains, one of those doors that provide access to the technical area and backstage. It was a small space, surrounded by cables, spotlights, files, and shelves. The smell of dust mixed with old wood created a heavy, almost suffocating atmosphere. He closed the door behind us, and it was only then that I realized. He was holding a blue folder in his hands, a thick folder full of documents, and before saying anything, he let out a long, deep, heavy sigh. The kind of sigh someone only gives when they are about to reveal a truth they know will hurt. My heart started beating erratically. He leaned on the table next to him, adjusted his glasses, and finally looked me in the eyes. His expression was a mixture of concern, empathy, and something I only understood later: indignation. "I asked you to come here because," he began, but his voice faltered for a second. "Because there's something you need to know. Something serious." My chest tightened. "Is it about my son?" I asked, trying to contain my anxiety. The director nodded slowly. "Yes, about him, and about the reason he asked you not to attend the graduation ceremony." I swallowed hard. The phrase hit me as if it were the first time I'd ever heard it. He then lifted the folder, holding it between the two of us, as if that object were proof, a secret, or a weapon. He tried again, taking a deep breath. "Received this." My gaze fixed on the folder. I didn't know what was inside, but my intuition told me it was something serious. Very serious. He continued, "Before I show you, I need you to understand one thing. We, as a school, have a responsibility to protect our students, but we also have a moral obligation to investigate when something doesn't seem right. And, in this case," he shook his head, "something definitely didn't seem right." The feeling that the ground was disappearing beneath my feet overwhelmed me. I tried to speak, but my voice wouldn't come out. The director noticed and then, with the calm of someone who knows they are about to change someone's life, said, "You need to know why your son didn't want you around." That moment froze in midair. I felt my blood run cold. I felt my breath catch in my throat. The world went absolutely silent, as if everything around us had vanished, leaving only me, the director, and that mysterious folder between us. It was like being on the edge between ignorance and truth, and I knew deep down in my soul that crossing that line would mean that something profound and painful was about to surface. And then, without saying anything more, he opened the folder. When the director opened the folder, I felt as if I were watching my own life being laid out on a dissecting table. He took out some papers, carefully arranging them, like someone handling something too delicate to be handled carelessly. The silence in that small space behind the stage was almost deafening. I could hear my own breathing, rapid and irregular, mixed with the distant sound of voices echoing from the auditorium corridor. He looked at me for a few seconds before speaking. "First of all, I want you to know that I'm not here to accuse you," she said, her voice firm but also understanding. "I'm here because something didn't add up. Something didn't make sense." Those words gave me a tiny glimmer of hope, but they also increased my fear. What's happening?" I managed to ask. He placed the first piece of paper on the table, facing me. I approached, still not quite understanding what it was. It was a typed document, with the school's letterhead at the top, and just below text that looked like some kind of report or formal record. My eyes began to scan the lines, and as the words fell into place, it was as if someone were slowly squeezing my neck. It read, among other things, "I would like to inform you that the student's father is an unstable, aggressive, and potentially dangerous person. There have been episodes of physical and psychological abuse against the son, who still fears his presence today. For emotional and physical safety, it is highly recommended that the father not be present at school events, especially during high-profile moments, such as the graduation ceremony." I stopped at the word aggression, then in the word dangerous, then in fear of his presence. It was as if all the letters began to dance before my eyes. I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. I felt nauseous, a deep nausea, not in my stomach, but in my soul. Is this serious?" I asked, my voice hoarse, barely audible. "Are they talking about me?" The director nodded gently. "This document reached me a few weeks ago," he explained. It was sent by email, then delivered in printed form. It arrived signed, and along with it came oral testimonies reinforcing these same claims. My heart started beating too fast, claiming that I am a danger, that I assaulted my own son. At that moment, a mixture of indignation and pain began to rise in my chest. It was as if someone had taken everything I cherished most, my relationship with my son, my honor as a father, my history, and decided to throw mud all over it. I never laid a finger on him, I said firmly, but also with a tremor that betrayed the emotional impact. Never, never. I've made mistakes in many things. I've made mistakes in the way I spoke. I've made mistakes in missing important moments. I've made mistakes in being too absent. But aggression? Danger? That's a lie. That's a cruel lie. The director was watching me intently, not as someone who doubted me, but as someone trying to weigh each reaction, each word. I know, he replied, or at least everything inside me told me there was something wrong with it, but he took a deep breath. You need to understand how this got to us and how it affected your son. He picked up another piece of paper. This time, it wasn't a formal report. It was a printed email. In the header, the sender, someone very familiar to me. My stomach churned. I no longer knew if I wanted to continue watching, but at the same time, I knew I needed to. I needed to face this all the way through to the end. He pointed to a section of the text, already highlighted with a marker. My son is afraid of his father. He doesn't like to talk about it, but he feels very bad when he imagines his father being present in crowded places, like a graduation ceremony. There have been situations where the father lost control, yelled, threatened. Please understand that if he asks his father not to go, it's because it traumatizes him and puts his emotional well-being at risk. I felt something inside me break, because it wasn't just a lie. It was a carefully constructed lie, with details, with phrases that someone handpicked to sound true. It was a lie that painted me as a monster. I put my hand to my head and rested it there, trying to process it. The images that came to my mind were confusing. Memories of moments when I had raised my voice, arguments with his mother, days of extreme stress, but no scene of physical violence, no moment when I had touched him. And yet, now there was a document, a record, a narrative saying that I was a danger. That's what made your son contact us, the director continued calmly. My eyes slowly lifted. He came to you, the director nodded. Yes, he came, and not just once. He was clearly conflicted, confused, distressed. He kept repeating that he didn't want to see you at graduation, but at the same time, he was ashamed of it. He said he had reasons, that he knew what his father was capable of. And honestly, that bothered me. Because when I asked if he had ever witnessed any aggression, he couldn't answer clearly. He seemed to be repeating something. Repeating something. That hit me hard. What do you mean? I asked. Repeating what? Words, the director replied. Words very similar to those in those documents. It was as if someone had put those ideas in his mouth beforehand, as if he were carrying a story that perhaps wasn't entirely his own. I closed my eyes for a moment. The pain of that realization was almost physical. I felt betrayed in a way I can't describe, because it wasn't just a loose lie. It was an organized lie, formalized, registered, and that lie had been strong enough to push my son away from me, to make him believe that I was a problem, that I was a threat, that his own father's presence at graduation could be dangerous. I felt like screaming, tearing up those papers, running away, calling everyone, demanding explanations. But I stayed there, sitting, paralyzed, as if someone had taken away my strength. And for the first time in a long time, I felt small, very small. Do you understand now why he asked you not to come? The director asked gently. He truly believed he was protecting himself. And he believed he was protecting his friends, too. He thought that if you were here, something could get out of control. The phrase, something could get out of control, kept echoing in my mind. Because ironically, the one who was losing control, there was me, on the inside. On the outside, I held on as best I could, "This is an injustice," I murmured, almost voicelessly. "A terrible injustice." "I know," the director replied sincerely. "And that's exactly why you're here, because I'm not going to be complicit in a lie." When he said that, something began to change inside me. The pain remained, but beneath it, another feeling began to emerge. A mixture of indignation and a will to fight. Yes, someone had spread a lie about me. Yes, that lie had been strong enough to alienate my son. Yes, she had tarnished my name, my honor, my image at school. But at that moment, I understood that the truth was not completely lost. There was still someone willing to look beyond appearances. There was still someone there, in the figure of that director, who didn't want to simply accept the most convenient version. And, as much as it hurt, one thing became very clear to me. If a lie had been able to separate me from my son, so it would be through the truth that I would try to bring him back. When the director realized the impact those accusations had on me, he let a few seconds of silence hang in the air. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was a respectful silence, as if he were giving me time to process the brutal weight of it all. I took deep breaths, trying to piece together my own sanity as I stared at those papers that painted me as a monster. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what he would say next. After putting some documents in his folder, the director approached me with a serious yet determined expression. He crossed his arms and leaned slightly on the table, as if about to reveal the most delicate part of the whole conversation. "Now," he said, his voice lower than before, "I need to tell you who he sent it." My heart raced. The question I had been avoiding asking finally took shape within me. Who would have such an interest in destroying me to this extent? I rested my hands on my knees, trying to prepare myself. He took a deep breath and then spoke clearly, without beating around the bush. The complaint came from his ex-wife's current husband. For a moment I couldn't react. My mind went completely blank. I just blinked, trying to figure out if I had heard right. "What?" I managed to say, my voice breaking. He confirmed with a slight nod. It was him. He was the one who sent us the emails. He was the one who personally delivered the printed version. He was the one who called twice to reinforce the concern. And the director paused, searching for the right words. He was the one who directly influenced his son. That last sentence hit me like a blow. A cold, calculated, cruel blow. My ex-wife's new husband. From that point on, everything started to make sense. And, at the same time, everything became more revolting. It was like putting together a jigsaw puzzle where all the pieces fit together, but the end result is so ugly that you'd rather not have seen it. "But why?" I asked, feeling a mixture of indignation and disbelief. Why would he do such a thing? Why would he make all this up? The director sighed, as if he had already given this point a lot of thought. "Look, I'm not a psychologist, nor a judge, but from what I've observed, your son has become very close to him. It seems he's trying to put himself in the role of the ideal father, you know? The father who is always present, always available, always perfect. And any previous paternal figure," he gestured with his hand, "seems to be an obstacle to his own protagonism." I closed my eyes, trying to contain the wave of feelings that rose like a raging tide. Jealousy, competition, territory, that's what it was all about. Furthermore, the director continued, his ex-wife also corroborated some of these accounts, albeit more discreetly, not directly in the accusations, but he frowned. It became clear that she didn't contradict anything he said. I could feel my whole body trembling. It hurt, but it made sense. From the beginning, I sensed that something about her behavior didn't add up. The coldness, the impatience, the fact that she showed no surprise when I said our son didn't want me around. It was almost as if everything had been planned, or at the very least accepted without question. The director then took another document from the folder and placed it on the table. "Look at this." It was an internal report prepared by a member of the school's psychological support team. There were notes there from the conversations my son had with her, and alongside some of the sentences, there were important observations. The student repeats phrases identical to those reported in the email. The student shows insecurity when talking about his father, but hesitates when giving concrete examples. There is evidence of external influence. The situation seems to be fueled by a nearby adult. Each word pierced me like a knife. My son, my own son. He was being manipulated. I started to get suspicious, the director said, because when I tried to delve deeper with him, he got confused. He kept reciting prepared, rehearsed phrases. Phrases that, he pointed to the email, are exactly the same as those here. The same structure, the same order of ideas, the same semantics. So, I said, swallowing hard, he's not afraid of me? The director shook his head. What he has is confusion. Someone instilled fear in him. Someone created this story and made him believe it. His ex-wife's new husband was the one who presented these accusations with such conviction that if I were less careful, I would have believed him. Anyone would have. His words were true, and that only made everything more infuriating. My ex-wife's new husband, a man who came into my son's life long after I did, a man who has never lived my story, a man who decided, out of pride, jealousy, and competition, to destroy the image my son had of me. I felt an unbearable tightness in my chest, a pain that mixed loss, anger, and humiliation. For a moment, I was breathless. He wanted to completely isolate you, the director said, confirming what I was beginning to understand. And he succeeded for a while. These accusations created an emotional barrier between you two, a barrier he thought would be permanent, a definitive barrier. But right there, at that moment, as I looked at those documents, the barrier was beginning to crack, because finally the truth was coming out. I tried to speak, but my voice failed me. I just wanted to be there for my son's graduation. That's all. The director moved a little closer, placing his hand on my shoulder in a human, sincere gesture that I will never forget. And you will be there, he said with conviction. That phrase resonated with me like a breath of hope amidst the chaos. But along with it came a new understanding, deeper, more painful. The fight wasn't just about a place at graduation. It was for a place in my son's life. And someone who should never have interfered, was fighting to get me out of there. I was still there, sitting in that small room behind the stage, trying to piece together my dignity, when the director slammed the folder shut. The sound of the plastic clattering felt like the final period of a sentence, not against me, but against the farce they had tried to construct. He remained silent for a few seconds, as if carefully choosing what to say next. Then, he straightened his posture, took a deep breath, and looked at me with a seriousness I hadn't seen before. I want you to understand something, he began. Not everyone would have come here today. Many people, seeing these accusations, would have given up, would have distanced themselves, would have simply accepted the distance as permanent. But you came. You wanted answers. You wanted to look at this head on. He paused briefly, as if weighing his own words. That tells me a lot about who you are. I didn't quite know how to react to that. In a way, I still felt fragile, exposed, too hurt to see myself as a strong person. But hearing that from a man like him in a place like that, in that context, it affected me. It was as if, amidst so many voices accusing me behind my back, for the first time someone was clearly saying, I'm not simply going to believe the worst about you. He approached the table again, opened the folder once more, and took out one last document, an internal memo bearing his own signature. When I received these complaints, I could have taken the easy way out, he explained. I could have just complied. I could have banned your entry here. I could have recommended that you stay away from the graduation ceremony. It would have been easy. It would have been safe. It would have been convenient. He looked me in the eyes, and I understood. He had been pressured. But that's not what I did, he added. I decided to investigate. He began to walk slowly around the small space, like a teacher explaining a difficult lesson. I spoke calmly with your son. I called his mother. I called his stepfather. I asked for details. I asked for specific situations. I asked for dates. I asked for examples. And to each direct question, the answers came vague, mixed up, at times contradictory. It seemed more like a poorly rehearsed script than a real experience. My chest tightened. I imagined my son there trying to sustain a story that perhaps wasn't entirely his own, repeating words, trying to justify a fear that someone had planted in his heart. It hurt to imagine that. It hurt a lot. I also looked through old records, the principal continued. Behavior history, report cards, observations from the psychological team, teacher reports. Nothing, absolutely nothing, indicated that you were this dangerous man they were describing. At no point did your son show fear at school when you appeared at smaller events, meetings, or brief encounters. On the contrary, on some occasions, according to reports, he even seemed calmer after speaking with you. That caught me by surprise. He calmed down? I asked, trying to understand. Yes, the director confirmed, which made me think, if you were really that much of a threat, why would, the presence of danger make the boy calmer at times? That doesn't make sense. And that's when I was sure there was something deeply inconsistent in this story. He stopped walking and stood in front of me again. This time, his expression wasn't just serious. It was determined. That's why I've made a decision, she said firmly. I will not allow this lie to continue guiding your son's life. Not here. Not under my responsibility. He rested one hand on the table, leaning slightly towards me. Today, before the ceremony, he will hear the truth. From me. From you. Faced with the facts. He has the right to know that he was manipulated. He has the right to hear the other side. He has the right not to carry a lie as if it were a memory. I remained silent for a few seconds, trying to process what he was proposing. A lump formed in my throat. Are you sure about this? I asked, afraid of the answer. Isn't it risky? Isn't it too delicate? It is risky, yes, he replied without hesitation. And it's delicate, but it's the right thing to do. And sometimes doing the right thing requires courage. Not only yours as a father, but mine as well, as an educator. He straightened his back, as if he were assuming at that very second the weight of his own authority. You deserve to be here, he said, with a conviction that brought tears to my eyes. Not just as a guest, not just as a decorative figure. You deserve to be here as a father, as someone who struggled, who made mistakes, who failed at some things, yes, like everyone else, but who never did what they're saying. And I won't condone such an injustice. I felt something break inside me, but this time, it wasn't pain. It was a kind of relief, a mixture of relief, gratitude, surprise, and a kind of respect I hadn't felt in a long time. Amid so many people who preferred to believe the most convenient version, there was someone willing to face the discomfort of the truth. But what if he doesn't believe? Us? I asked, almost in a whisper. What if he gets even angrier? What if he thinks we're trying to force something? The director took a deep breath. He might rebel at first. He might deny it. He might cry. He might get even more confused. But in the long run, the worst thing we can do to a young person is to leave them trapped in a lie. He needs access to the facts. He needs to see that there's another version of the story, the version of the person he's rejecting, without really knowing them. He glanced quickly at his watch. The final rehearsal for the ceremony is almost here, he commented. He'll be here soon. I want to talk to him beforehand, but this time, you won't be left out. Those words made my heart race. Are you saying that? I began. I'm saying that we're both going to talk to him, the director replied. Me as a mediator, you as a father. I don't want shouting. I don't want accusations. I don't want this to turn into a trial. I want it to become a meeting between the truth and the version they told him. The rest, he gave a slight, wry smile, I leave to his conscience. I ran my hands over my face, trying to hold back the tears that insisted on welling up. They weren't just tears of pain, but also of relief. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't fighting alone. I don't know how to thank you, I managed to say. Truly, after all this, it would have been so much easier if you had sided with them. He shook his head. It's not about sides, he replied. It's about character. I won't sleep peacefully knowing that I allowed a father to be destroyed by a lie, nor that a son built his identity on a farce. Here, in my school, that won't happen. His words carried more than professional authority. They carried humanity, and that's what made everything so powerful. He then picked up the briefcase, held it by his side, and gestured with his head toward the backstage door. "He should be arriving soon," he said in a firm but almost paternal tone. "I'll have your son called here, and when he comes in, I want you to be sincere. Not perfect, not a hero, just sincere." I nodded slowly. My heart was pounding, but now it wasn't just from fear. It was also a sign of courage. Because at that moment, I realized that the fight was no longer just against the lies they told about me. He was also against lies that, if left unexposed, could trap my son in an invisible prison for years. The director opened the door, ready to call someone from the team. Before leaving, however, he turned around one last time and repeated, "Remember, you deserve to be here." And as he walked away backstage, I stood there alone for a few seconds, feeling the weight and, at the same time, the force of that phrase echoing within me. I deserved to be there, as a man, as a father, and above all, as someone who, on that day, was willing to face the truth, however painful it might be, to try to recover what a lie had almost taken away forever. I don't know how long I stood there alone after the director left to call my son. It could have been 3 minutes or 30. When you're about to face something that could change everything, time loses its logic. I paced back and forth in that small space behind the stage, listening to the discreet creaking of the wood under my feet, smelling the curtain fabric, dust, and the warm light of the extinguished spotlights. My heart was beating so hard I could hear my own pulse in my ear. Each beat seemed to ask the same question. What if he rejects me again? Another question followed immediately. What if he doesn't believe me? And at the heart of it all, a seed of hope kept asking, what if today is the day everything changes? I heard footsteps approaching the hallway, low voices, a quick murmur, and then a light knock on the door. "May I come in?" It was the director's voice. "Of course," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I actually was. The door opened, slowly. First, I saw the principal, and right behind him, my son. For a moment, it was as if the entire scene disappeared. Theater, backstage, school, papers, accusations, everything vanished. It was just the two of us, father and son, facing each other, in a space too small for so much accumulated emotion. He entered slowly, his shoulders tense, his chin slightly raised, like someone trying to appear more confident than he felt. His eyes quickly passed over me and then looked away, as if contact were a risk. My chest tightened. That was my boy. The same person who once ran into my arms, who once called me a hero, who once waited for me at the window. Now he was there, right in front of me, but he seemed miles away. The director closed the door behind us and stood between us, like a silent mediator for a few seconds. "Thank you for coming," he said, looking at my son. "I know you're nervous, and that's normal. Everything's fine." My son simply nodded without saying anything. His hands fidgeted restlessly. He was breathing rapidly, I could tell. I knew that way about him. The director then continued, "I called you here because there are things that need to be said, things you deserve to hear. And because it's not fair that such big decisions are made based on only one version of the story." My son's gaze hardened slightly, as if he had internally armed himself upon hearing the word decisions. "It's about," he began, somewhat hesitantly, "about me not wanting him," and his eyes finally turned to me, "to come to the graduation." There was guilt in his voice. Defense, too. It was as if he still didn't know which side to take. The director took a deep breath. "Yes, that's it. And something more. It's about because you made that decision." He picked up the folder once more, but this time he didn't place it on the table. He simply held it, as a symbol of what was about to be revealed. "Do you remember the conversations we had?" he asked my son. "When you told me you were afraid of your father? That he was aggressive? That he could embarrass you, expose you, even hurt you?" My son stood motionless. Then he nodded. "I remember," she replied, her voice low. I didn't want him to come. I thought he might, I don't know, ruin everything." That hurt. It hurt to hear it from him. But I forced myself to stay quiet. My breath was held, my hand clenched, my heart in pieces. but I knew I needed to let the director lead. "That's fine," said the director. "I'm not here to judge you. On the contrary, I'm here because I care about you. And precisely because I care, I investigated what you told me." My son looked up, confused. "Investigate? What do you mean?" "By talking to everyone," the principal replied. "With your mother, with your stepfather, with you, with the teachers, with the support staff, with the school's records, with concrete actions, not just empty phrases. And I've come to a conclusion you need to hear." The atmosphere became even more tense. I could almost feel the air getting heavy. "Most of what you believe about your father," the director spoke slowly, "didn't come from you." An absolute silence filled the room. My son frowned. "What do you mean, it didn't come from me?" he asked defensively. The director spoke calmly but firmly. "It came from someone who I was talking about him to you, someone who used strong words, dangerous, unstable, aggressive, someone who told you he could ruin your big day, someone who insisted you'd have more peace keeping that father out of your life, and we both know who that person is." My son's gaze has changed. A glimmer of understanding mixed with shock began to appear. He murmured, almost voicelessly, The director shook his head. "Your stepfather filed formal complaints against your father. He wrote emails. He came here in person. He reported events without proof, described behaviors without details, instilled fear based on assumptions. And at the same time," the director continued, "you never managed to tell me a single concrete episode in which your father assaulted you. You said you were afraid, but you couldn't explain exactly what you were afraid of." My son turned pale. His eyes filled with tears, but he tried to hold them back. He began. "I thought that—" He lost his train of thought mid-sentence. The director then stepped aside, creating space between us. It was as if he were symbolically stepping aside to allow the bridge between father and son to begin to be rebuilt. "I'm not saying you weren't scared," the director explained. "What you felt is real. What you heard was very powerful. But you need to know that fear can also be planted. And in this case, it was." He then looked at me, as if giving a signal. "Now, I think it's time for you to listen to your father, really, without filters, without anyone in between telling you what you should feel, just the two of you, and I'll be here if you need me." My son turned his face towards me, and for the first time in a long time, he really looked at me, not as a ghost from the past, not as a burden, not as a danger, but as someone he didn't know as well as he thought. I took a deep breath, feeling my voice tremble even before I could speak. "Son," I began, and the words already carried everything I had held back until then. "I need you to listen to me with an open heart, not as the terrible father they described you as, not as the dangerous man they invented, but as the man who was there when you took your first steps, who carried you in his arms when you were afraid of thunder, who even failing at many things never wanted to hurt you." He bit his lower lip, visibly shaken. "I was wrong," I admitted, feeling the tears welling up. "I was wrong not to be there as much as you deserved. I was wrong to let work steal time that should have been yours. I was wrong to lose my temper a few times. I was never perfect. But there's one thing I need you to know. I never hurt you. I never laid a finger on you to harm you. I never wanted to be a danger. If you ever felt afraid of me, it was because someone instilled that fear in you." His eyes began to well up with tears. The hardened face began to dissolve. "But he murmured, "he always said that you were explosive, that you could humiliate me, that you could cause a scene at graduation." His voice cracked. He brought his hand to his face. "He always said, 'Your father only shows up when it's convenient. He'll ruin everything. He'll want to show off. He'll embarrass you in front of everyone.'" I felt a fierce mixture of anger and pain when I heard that. Inside, I wanted to scream. I wanted to go after him, demand explanations, confront him. But he wasn't my priority there. He was my son. "He can think whatever he wants of me," I replied, trying to remain calm. "But you're the one who lived with me. You're the one who saw me cry in secret when you left, even if you didn't know it. You're the one who saw me try, stumble, get up, insist on being there, I can't erase what he said to you, but I can offer you something he never will be able to. The truth of our history. My son couldn't hold on. The tears started to flow freely. He looked at the director, as if seeking confirmation. Is it true? She asked in a whisper. Is it true that he investigated and that he has nothing to prove what they said? The director nodded earnestly. That's true. I found nothing to support your stepfather's version of events. On the contrary, what I found was a pattern of repetition, words that didn't originate from you. They came from another adult. You were used in a war that isn't yours. The phrase hit him so hard that it was almost possible to see him physically shrink. He brought both hands to his face, breathing heavily. He began, his voice breaking. I didn't know. I just believed. I thought that he was protecting me, that you were all of that. He lowered his head and a stifled sob overcame him. It wasn't a loud cry. It was a painful cry, full of shame, confusion, and regret. I took a step forward, hesitantly. For a moment I was afraid to approach him lest he back away, but I didn't want to miss that moment. Look at me, I asked gently. Slowly, he removed his hands from his face and looked up. His eyes were red, his nose a little red too, the expression of a boy who, for the first time, realizes, he has carried a story that wasn't his. I felt tears escaping from my own eyes. I never stopped loving you, I said. Not even when you distanced yourself. Not even when you stopped answering my messages. Not even when you asked me not to go to your graduation. Did it hurt? It hurt like a piece of me had been ripped away. But I never stopped being your father inside, I said, lightly patting my chest. And if I'm here today, it's because I still believe it's not too late to rebuild. He took a deep breath, his lips trembling. For a few seconds, silence took over everything. It was the kind of silence that precedes a major decision. Then, finally, he opened his mouth, and the words that came out were the ones I had been waiting for, without even knowing it for so long. Dad, he said, the words coming out small but full of weight. I really wish you were there. The voice broke mid-sentence. He swallowed hard and tried to start again. I was just scared. Scared of disappointing him. Scared of what he would say if he knew I wanted you around. I thought that it was wrong to want you there. I thought choosing you would be betraying him. 2 large tears streamed down her face at once. Forgive me, Father, he continued. And now the tears came harder. Forgive me for believing in others more than in you. Forgive me for repeating things that weren't even mine. Forgive me for asking you not to go. I couldn't stand still any longer. I took 2 steps forward, and I hugged him. For a second, he seemed frozen, but then his arms wrapped around me again, tightly. That hug wasn't perfect, nor did it solve all the problems, nor erase all the years of distance, nor all the words spoken, but it meant something that, for me, was worth more than any document, any accusation, any lie. My son still recognized me as his father. I held him against my chest, feeling his shoulders tremble. I forgive you, I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. And, it's not because you deserve forgiveness. It's because I'm your father. And a father, even when wounded, knows when his son is also a victim. The director watched us from afar, in silence. It was not a silence of omission. It was the respectful silence of someone who knew that at that moment, the school had already fulfilled its role. The rest was between father, son, and the truth. After a few moments, my son stepped back a little, wiping his eyes with the back of his hands. He took a deep breath, trying to compose himself. You, he said, still emotional, are you going there tomorrow? I smiled, my eyes still brimming with tears. Only if you want me to be there. He did not hesitate. I want to, he replied. I want you to be there, in the audience, watching me go up on that stage. I want to look out into the crowd and know that you weren't left out, because someone made up a story about you. I nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and relief that I couldn't put into words. At that moment, I understood something profound. Sometimes it's not the shouting that changes a story. It's the truth, told calmly. It's the courage to confront lies. It is love that endures even when questioned. And there, in that small space backstage at a school, before a graduation ceremony, a lie began to lose its power. And a father-son bond, which had almost been broken forever, began, finally, to be rebuilt. Graduation day arrived like one of those moments you feel even before you experience it. From the instant I woke up, there seemed to be something different in the air. It wasn't just anxiety. It was a kind of nervous peace, a mixture of relief and anticipation. I knew, deep down, that this would be an unforgettable day, but not for the reasons I had imagined when my son asked me, in a trembling voice, not to go. I spent hours getting ready, not out of vanity, but because of the emotional importance of that day. I didn't want to overdo it, nor provoke any sense of confrontation. I just wanted to be there with dignity, as a father. With each button I fastened on my shirt, with each fold I adjusted in my pants, I felt an entire chapter of my life reorganizing itself. It seemed that finally, after years of misunderstandings, distance, absences, and manipulations, something was falling back into place. When I arrived at school, everything was different from the last time I was there. There were no more sideways glances, hidden whispers, or uncomfortable expressions upon seeing me arrive. On the contrary, some professors greeted me respectfully, others with a discreet smile as if they knew what had happened behind the scenes. The secretary herself, who had previously seemed tense, now greeted me with a slight, almost conspiratorial nod. It was as if everyone knew that an injustice had been dismantled, and that somehow they had witnessed my silent struggle. The auditorium was full. Parents, grandparents, uncles, siblings, teachers. The sound of conversations mingled with the clatter of chairs, the nervous footsteps of the graduates waiting behind the curtains. I found my seat, right in the first row, exactly where the principal had reserved it for me. I sat there with my hands clasped and my heart beating like that of a teenager, not a man full of emotional scars. As the lights dimmed and the murmur gradually subsided, I felt someone stop beside me. When I looked, it was the director. He placed his hand on my shoulder in a firm, silent gesture of support and whispered, "He knows you're here." I could only acknowledge them with a nod, unable to speak. My throat was too tight. The music started. The first classes entered to the sound of applause. The students crossed the stage with that typical smile of someone celebrating not just a diploma, but an entire stage of life. I watched everything attentively, but my gaze searched for only one face. And then he appeared. My son walked slowly onto the stage, his chin slightly raised, his eyes searching for someone in the audience. As soon as he found me, there, in the center of the first row, his face changed. It was subtle, but I saw it. The slight tremor at the corner of the mouth, the sigh trapped in his chest, the sparkle in their eyes. I unconsciously placed my hand on my chest. It was instinct. It was love. It was pride. He sat with his colleagues and tried to maintain his composure, but he glanced at me from time to time, as if he wanted to make sure I was really there, that it wasn't just a dream, not just a hidden desire, not just a repressed wish. I was there. I had stayed. I had fought to be present, and he knew it. The tributes began. Awards were presented, professors were mentioned, funny stories were told. Each name announced was followed by warm applause. But, as beautiful as all of this was, my heart awaited one moment, the final speech. When they called the name of the class speaker, my son's name, my breath caught in my throat. He walked slowly to the podium. He held the paper with both hands, but his fingers trembled slightly. When he reached the podium, he positioned the microphone, took a deep breath, and looked at the audience. And our eyes met. There were no more distances. There were no more invisible barriers. There were no more lies between us. He began his speech by talking about what everyone expected, the difficulties the class faced, the challenges of that year, the memorable teachers, and the friendships that were formed. He spoke well, with the emotion of someone who had lived each moment intensely. But then, he paused. A pause that nobody understood. except me. He swallowed hard, looked at the paper, and then looked at me again. She began, her voice trembling slightly, wanted to take this moment to thank someone very special. A small murmur ran through the auditorium. Someone who, even when I didn't understand, never gave up on me. I felt my eyes burning. He continued, I want to thank the man who never stopped trying. To the man who made a mistake, yes, but was always willing to admit it. To the man who supported me even when I distanced myself. To the man who suffered because of me, but welcomed me with open arms when I needed the truth. I want to thank my father. The auditorium fell silent for a moment, but it was a silence filled with emotion, the kind that precedes something great. And then he added, Dad, thank you for being here today. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for being the kind of father who doesn't let a lie erase years of love. I couldn't hold back any longer. The tears just flowed. People started looking at me, some smiling, others wiping their own eyes. I wasn't ashamed to cry there. Not at that moment. Not after everything. My son, still on stage, gave a slight smile, a shy smile but full of meaning, and made an almost imperceptible gesture with his head as if to say, I'm with you. He was small, but for me, it was everything. When the ceremony ended, he came down from the stage and walked straight towards me. He didn't look away, he didn't hesitate, he didn't look at anyone else. He came right up to me, and he hugged me. A different kind of hug than the one from the day before. A full hug. Deep, sincere. Reconciliation in the form of a gesture. I held him, feeling his breath against my shoulder, feeling an entire chapter of our story being rewritten there, amidst applause and tears. Dad, he murmured, I want you in my life. Really? I tightened my arms around him. I never left, I replied. And there, in the middle of the auditorium, at the close of a school year, I realized our reunion was not a miracle. It was the victory of truth over lies. It was the victory of love over fear. It was the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter in which father and son would walk together without shadows, without manipulation, without secrets. A viral video-worthy ending, a truly moving ending, an ending that shows that sometimes the greatest graduations don't happen on stage. They happen within the heart. If this story moved you, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps me continue bringing you profound stories like this one. And tell me in the comments, how far would you go to protect a child?